Their laughter cut through the commissary like shrapnel. Look at her jacket. Pulled it from a dumpster, probably. I stood frozen, my fingers tightening around a can of soup, the metal cold against my scarred wrist. They did not know the blood woven into that faded olive fabric, the lives it had outlasted. But I did, and I would make them see. The Fort Braxton commissary hummed with morning chaos. Boots scuffed linoleum floors, carts rattled past, pushed by young families in camouflage caps. The air smelled of coffee and bleach, sharp and sterile. I adjusted the collar of my jacket, the sleeves frayed at the cuffs, the patch above my heart worn to a ghost of stitches. At 55, I moved like a shadow through this military world, my right leg dragging slightly, a private scar from a night no one was allowed to remember. My steel gray hair was pulled into a tight bun, my face a mask of calm. I had learned long ago to bury the pain. I carried a red basket, my grocery list folded neatly in my pocket. The canned goods aisle was quiet, save for the 2 lieutenants trailing me. Their pressed uniforms gleamed under fluorescent lights, their lieutenant bars polished to a mirror shine. The taller one, Lieutenant Harmon, smirked as he leaned toward his friend, Lieutenant Daniels. "Must be her grandfather's jacket," he said, voice low but deliberate. "Vietnam surplus, maybe. Thrift store special." Daniels chuckled, his eyes flicking to my back. I kept my gaze on the soup cans, comparing prices with mechanical precision. Money was tight. The VA benefits I should have had were trapped in a maze of redacted files, my service records sealed under layers of classification. My shoulders tensed, but I did not turn. I selected 2 cans of chicken noodle, placing them in my basket with care. The lieutenants followed, their boots clicking on the floor, their conversation a steady drip of mockery. I moved to the pasta section, reaching for a box of spaghetti on a high shelf. My right shoulder protested, a dull ache flaring where shrapnel had torn through muscle 22 years ago. The sleeve of my jacket rode up, revealing the surgical scar on my wrist, jagged and pale. I winced, not from pain but from the memory it summoned. The desert air had been thick with grit, the night sky choked with sand. "Captain Carter, extraction windows closing!" Major Callahan's voice crackled through my earpiece, urgent and raw. Helicopters roared overhead, their blades slicing the storm. I crouched behind a dune, my rifle heavy in my hands, my team's silhouettes fading into the chaos. 3 of us would make it out. 3 would not. The memory clawed at me, sharp as the shrapnel that had carved my flesh. I shoved it down, my knuckles whitening around the pasta box. I placed it in my basket and moved on. The lieutenants were bolder now, their voices carrying. "Think that scar's real?" Daniels whispered, not quietly enough. "Or just part of the costume?" Stolen valor types always have a story. Harmon snorted. "Bet she's headed to the VA next, fishing for a discount." I stopped at the dairy case, my reflection faint in the glass door. The woman staring back had hollow eyes, her jaw tight, her hands steady despite the storm inside. I reached for a carton of eggs, my limp more pronounced as I shifted my weight. Long hours standing always woke the old injury, a shard of metal still lodged deep in my femur. A group of enlisted soldiers passed, their laughter dying as they caught the lieutenant's tone. One, a specialist, glanced at my jacket and grinned, sensing the game. "Vintage look, ma'am," he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Almost authentic." Harmon seized the opening. "Almost," he said, loud enough for nearby shoppers to turn. "Key word." The air grew heavy, the commissary's noise fading as eyes settled on me. I closed the dairy case, the eggs cold in my basket, and turned toward the checkout. My heart pounded, but my face remained stone. At the register, the cashier, a retired master sergeant, his veteran's cap faded, scanned my items with quiet efficiency. His eyes lingered on my jacket, on the shadow where the Spectre unit patch had once been. He said nothing, but his nod was knowing, a flicker of respect in his weathered face. "Have a good day, ma'am," he said, handing me the receipt. "You too," I replied, my voice rough from silence. They were my first words of the morning. I headed to customer service, my limp more pronounced now. The VA appeal required me to verify my address, a ritual that never stuck in their system. The line was slow, and I stood patiently, weight shifted to my left leg. My mind drifted again, back to that desert night. "Go now, Carter!" Callahan had shouted, his silhouette swallowed by the sandstorm. "That's an order!" I had run, my legs screaming, blood soaking my uniform. The memory dissolved as the clerk, a young woman named Alicia, called, "Next!" I stepped forward, sliding my ID across the counter. "I need to verify my address for base records," I said. Alicia smiled, professional but detached. "Active duty or dependent?" she asked, typing. "Veteran," I said. Her fingers paused. "I'll need your veteran ID or DD-214. I produced a folder, its edges worn, containing a Department of Defense letter. "My records are classified." "This is what I have." Alicia's smile faltered. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but we need standard documentation. Let me get my supervisor." Behind me, the lieutenants had finished checking out and now stood nearby, watching. Harmon's voice carried, sharp and deliberate. "Some people will say anything for a 10% discount." Daniels laughed, joined by a chuckle from another clerk. The supervisor, a middle-aged woman with a clipped manner, arrived and scanned my papers. "These don't meet our requirements," she said, her tone apologetic but firm. "You'll need to contact the VA directly." I exhaled, frustration coiling in my chest. "The VA sent me here to verify my address for my appeal." The supervisor shook her head, handing back my folder. "I'm sorry, ma'am. Try the main administration building." I tucked the papers into my jacket, my fingers brushing a faded photograph inside. A snapshot of my team, faces shadowed, standing by a helicopter with obscured markings. The lieutenants' voices grew louder, drawing a small crowd. "Classic stolen valor," Daniels said, no longer whispering. "Wear a beat-up jacket, claim some secret mission. Should be a crime." I straightened, my grocery bags heavy in my hands, and turned to leave. The commissary's noise seemed to fade, the weight of their words pressing against me. I had faced worse, bullets, sandstorms, the screams of my team. But this betrayal, from those I had served to protect, cut deeper. As I neared the exit, Harmon stepped closer, his voice a taunt. "Hey, ma'am, what unit was that jacket from? Special Forces? CIA?" His grin was a challenge, his eyes daring me to answer. I stopped, my pulse roaring in my ears. The automatic doors loomed ahead, sunlight glinting beyond. I could walk away, let their ignorance bury me. Or I could turn, face them, and let the truth burn through their mockery. My hand tightened on my bags, the scar on my wrist throbbing. I opened my mouth to speak, my voice low and steady, when the doors slid open and a 4-star general stepped through. The general's shadow fell across the linoleum, his 4 stars gleaming like a warning. I swallowed my words. The truth I had nearly unleashed now locked behind my teeth. Lieutenant Harmon's grin faltered, his taunt hanging in the air, unanswered. The commissary held its breath, but the weight of their mockery still clung to me, heavy as the desert sand I could never wash away. General Henry Brooks strode past, his aides trailing with clipboards and urgent murmurs. His silver hair caught the light, his posture rigid with decades of command. I stepped aside, my grocery bags brushing my leg, my eyes lowered. Civilians learned to fade around men like him, and I had spent years perfecting invisibility. But the lieutenant's voices followed me, quieter now, testing the silence. "Guess she's got nothing to say," Daniels muttered, his tone smug. Figures. I gripped my bags tighter, the scar on my wrist pulsing, and kept walking toward the aisles. The general's presence had bought me a moment, but the storm was not over. The commissary buzzed again, its rhythm unbroken. Carts squeaking, children laughing, the intercom crackling with a sale on frozen pizza. I moved to the baking aisle, my list a lifeline. Flour, sugar, oil. Simple things, grounding things. My right leg ached with each step, the old injury flaring under the strain of standing too long. I paused, leaning against a shelf, and closed my eyes. The fluorescent hum faded, replaced by the roar of helicopter blades. Sand stung my face, thick in my throat. "Carter, move!" Major Callahan's voice was sharp, his hand on my shoulder, pushing me toward the extraction point. Gunfire cracked in the distance, Iranian guard units closing in. I stumbled, my leg burning, blood seeping through my fatigues. "Not without you, sir!" I shouted, but he was already turning back, his silhouette swallowed by the storm. I opened my eyes, the memory a knife in my chest. The flour bag in my hand trembled. I placed it in my basket and moved on, my limp more pronounced. The lieutenants had not followed, but their presence lingered, their words a poison seeping into the air. Shoppers glanced at me, some curious, others dismissive. A young mother pushed her cart past, her toddler waving a toy flag. I forced a smile, but it felt hollow. At the coffee station, retired veterans clustered, their voices low, their caps heavy with pins. One, a grizzled man with a Navy emblem, met my gaze. His eyes flicked to my jacket, to the faded patch above my heart, and he nodded, a silent question in his look. I nodded back, my throat tight, and turned away. The dairy aisle was cooler, the hum of refrigerators a steady drone. I reached for a block of cheese, my fingers brushing the cold plastic. Behind me, footsteps, deliberate, unhurried. I tensed, knowing before I turned. Lieutenant Harmon stood at the aisle's end, his arms crossed, his smirk back in place. Daniels leaned against a shelf, picking at his nails. "Still shopping, ma'am?" Harmon said, his voice laced with mockery. "Thought you'd be at the VA by now, spinning your story." I set the cheese in my basket, my movements slow, deliberate. My heart pounded, but my face was stone. "I have nothing to prove to you," I said, my voice low, steady. It was the first time I had spoken to them, and it felt like breaking a vow. Harmon's smirk widened. "Oh, come on. That jacket's got to have a tail. Special ops? Black ops? Or just a good find at the thrift shop?" Daniels laughed, stepping closer. "Bet she's got a whole script. Classified missions, right?" "Can't tell us because it's all top secret." The air grew heavy, shoppers slowing to watch. A young soldier, his uniform crisp, hesitated nearby, his eyes darting between us. I straightened, my shoulders squared despite the ache in my right arm. "You would not understand," I said, my gaze locking with Harmon's. "And I do not owe you an explanation." Their laughter was sharp, cutting. "Classic," Daniels said, loud enough for the growing crowd. "No proof, no story. Just a sad old lady playing soldier." The words landed like blows, each one a reminder of the years I had spent silent, my service buried in redacted files. I turned to leave, my basket heavy, when a new voice cut through. "Morning, ma'am." The cashier from earlier, the master sergeant, stood at the aisle's end, his veteran's cap tilted slightly. His eyes were on my jacket, on the ghost of the Spectre unit patch, and they held no mockery. "Need help with your shopping?" he asked, his tone steady, deliberate. I shook my head, grateful for the lifeline. "I am fine, thank you," I said, my voice softer now. He nodded, his gaze flicking to the lieutenants, a warning in his silence. They stepped back, their smirks fading. But I knew it was not over. I moved to the next aisle, my heart still racing. The cashiers respect a small anchor in the storm. At the checkout, he was there again, scanning my items with the same quiet efficiency. His name tag read James, and his hands were steady, scarred like mine. "This jacket," he said, his voice low as he bagged my flour. "I have seen patches like that before. Not many, but enough to know they mean something." I met his eyes, startled by the recognition. "You do not ask," I said, a reflex born of decades in shadows. He smiled, faint but real. "I do not need to. Some stories do not need telling to be true." He handed me my receipt, his nod a quiet salute. "Take care, Captain." The title, spoken so casually, hit me like a bullet. I froze, my breath catching. How did he know? Had he seen something in the patch, in my bearing, that others missed? I nodded, unable to speak, and gathered my bags. The lieutenants were gone, but their words echoed, a challenge I could not escape. I headed for the exit, the automatic doors gleaming ahead. My mind drifted unbidden to that desert night again. The sandstorm had blinded us, the helicopters grounded. Major Callahan had stayed behind, his voice calm over the radio. "Get the diplomats out, Carter. That is the mission." I had obeyed, dragging a wounded teammate to safety, my legs screaming with every step. But Callahan had not followed. His jacket, the one I wore now, was all that came back, stained with his blood. I blinked, the memory dissolving as I neared the doors. The commissary's noise returned, a dull roar of life. Then I heard it, Harmon's voice, sharp and close. "Hey, ma'am!" he called, stepping into my path. Daniels flanked him, their confidence restored. "One last question. If that jacket's so special, why not wear the real patch? Or did they take it away when you got caught lying?" The crowd around us stilled, their eyes on me, waiting. My pulse roared, my scar throbbing. I could walk away, let their ignorance win. But something broke inside me, a dam I had held for 22 years. I opened my mouth, ready to tell them of the sand, the blood, the lives lost in a mission they would never understand. And then the doors slid open again, and General Brooks stepped through, his gaze locking onto my jacket. His body went rigid, his aides freezing behind him. The lieutenants turned, their faces paling as the general's eyes found the faded patch, the ghost of stitches only a few could recognize. He handed his clipboard to an aide, his movements sharp, deliberate. And then, with a precision that silenced the world, he snapped to attention and saluted me. The general's salute was a blade, slicing through the commissary's hum. My breath caught, grocery bags heavy in my hands as General Henry Brooks stood rigid, his hand raised in perfect form. The lieutenants froze, their mocking grins erased, and the crowd's whispers died. I stood exposed, the faded patch on my jacket no longer a secret but a beacon, burning with a truth I had buried for 22 years. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting sharp shadows on the linoleum. General Brooks's silver hair gleamed, his 4 stars a constellation of authority. His eyes, sharp and unyielding, locked onto the ghost of stitches above my heart, the Spectre unit emblem, worn to near invisibility. His aides, clutching clipboards, stood confused, their steps halted 2 paces behind. Lieutenant Harmon and Lieutenant Daniels shifted, their boots squeaking, their faces drained of color. I felt the weight of every gaze, shoppers, soldiers, clerks, all fixed on me, a woman in a frayed jacket who had dared to stand still. My right leg ached, the old shrapnel wound pulsing under the strain of standing. I transferred my bags to my left hand, the scar on my wrist throbbing. Muscle memory, drilled into me decades ago, took over. I straightened, my shoulders squared despite the protest in my arm, and returned the salute with crisp precision. The movement was fluid, automatic. transforming me from a limping civilian to the soldier I had once been. "Captain Carter," General Brooks said, his voice low but carrying, slicing through the silence. "Spectre Unit, Tyron 2003. It was not a question but a confirmation, a key turning in a lock I had thought rusted shut. "Yes, sir," I replied, my voice stronger than I felt. The words echoed in my chest, pulling me back to that desert night, sand in my lungs, gunfire cracking, Major Callahan's last order ringing in my ears. The commissary seemed to fade, the crowd a blur, as 22 years collapsed into this single moment. General Brooks lowered his hand and I followed, my arm trembling slightly. The air was thick, charged with questions no one dared ask. "At ease, Captain," he said, though I had no rank to claim anymore. "Thank you, sir," I answered, decades of discipline anchoring me. The general turned to his aides, his tone sharp. "Wait outside." It was not a request. The aides exchanged glances, then hurried toward the exit, their clipboards clutched tight. The crowd parted for them, silent, as if afraid to break the spell. General Brooks gestured toward me, his eyes never leaving mine. "You were with Spectre Unit," he said, quieter now, but his words carried to those nearby. "Tyron, 2003. Your team saved 32 lives, including mine." My throat tightened, the memory of that night surging. 3 helicopters down, hostiles closing in, my team of 6 carving an escape route through a sandstorm. Only 3 of us had come home. I nodded, unable to speak. The general's gaze softened, but his posture remained rigid. "That insignia," he said, pointing to my jacket's faded patch. "It has not been worn since your unit was disbanded. Official records call Tyron an equipment recovery." His voice hardened, a trace of anger beneath the calm. "But I was there." "I know what you did." The crowd stirred, whispers rippling. A young soldier near the checkout dropped his energy drink, the can clattering on the floor. Harmon and Daniels stood rooted, their earlier mockery now a noose around their necks. The general's words were a lifeline, pulling me from the shadows I had lived in for decades. But they also burned, exposing wounds I had kept hidden. I clutched my grocery bags, the plastic handles cutting into my palms. "Thank you, sir," I said, my voice steady despite the storm inside. "It was our mission." He studied me, his eyes searching for something. Guilt, pride, pain. "How many of your team made it back, Captain?" he asked, his tone suggesting he knew the answer. "3, sir," I said softly. "I am the last." The words hung heavy, a requiem for Major Callahan, Lieutenant Way, Specialist Rodriguez, and Sergeant Decker. The general's jaw tightened, the only sign of emotion. The commissary was silent now, every ear straining. Even the cashier, James, paused mid-scan, his veteran's cap tilted as he watched. I felt exposed, raw, as if the general had peeled back my skin to reveal the scars beneath. He gestured toward the cafe corner, a small cluster of tables under a flickering light. "Join me for coffee, Captain," he said, not a question, but a command. My heart raced, the weight of his recognition both a gift and a burden. I nodded, my voice gone. "Of course, sir." As we moved toward the cafe, the crowd parted, their eyes following us, some with awe, others with shame. Harmon and Daniels remained frozen, their faces pale, their earlier confidence shattered. A young airman at the cafe counter rushed over, his hands shaking as he took our order. "Coffee black," the general said. "The same," I added, my voice hoarse. We settled at a corner table, the plastic chair cold against my back. The airman set down our coffees, the cups steaming, and retreated. General Brooks leaned forward, his hands clasped, his 4 stars glinting. "I have often wondered about your team," he said, his voice low. "After Tyron, your unit vanished into classified files. Even I could not access them. I traced the rim of my cup, the heat biting my fingers. Spectre unit was designed that way, sir, I said. Triple-blind protocols, mission details, team names, even our existence, compartmentalized. It kept us safe, and others. He nodded, his eyes distant. Your extraction prevented a war. The diplomats you saved were negotiating a ceasefire. If you had failed, the region would have burned. I swallowed, the memory of that night vivid. Callahan's voice, the weight of his jacket as I carried it from the helicopter, stained with his blood. We did what we were trained to do, sir, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. But the cost was high. The general's gaze sharpened. What brings you to Fort Braxton, Captain? Last intelligence had you retired in Colorado. I hesitated, the familiar frustration rising. Medical appeal, sir, I said. My leg, my shoulder, damaged in Tehran. The medical records exist, but they are classified. The VA cannot process my claims without documentation I am not allowed to have. His expression darkened, a storm gathering. A catch-22, he said, his voice tight. Your service saves lives, but the system buries you. I nodded, my fingers tightening around my cup. Every 3 months I try again, every time they send me in circles. The general's jaw clenched, his eyes burning with something I could not name. Anger, guilt, resolve. He pulled out his phone, his movements swift, decisive. This is General Brooks, he said into it, his voice steel. I need immediate action on a personnel matter. Clearance level Sierra 9 Delta 40 Tango. He paused, listening. Declassify everything on Spectre Unit, Tyran 2003, relating to personnel injuries. Priority directive. Override protocols. My order. He ended the call, his gaze meeting mine. Bureaucracy is slow, Captain, but my office will move mountains. Your service will not stay buried. My chest tightened, emotions surging, gratitude, relief, fear. After years of fighting alone, his words were a crack in the wall I had built around my pain. I opened my mouth to thank him, but a shadow fell across the table. Lieutenant Harmon and Daniels stood there, at attention, their faces taut with shame. Sir, Harmon said, his voice strained. Request permission to speak. The general glanced at me, a silent question. I nodded, my heart pounding. Granted, Brooks said, his tone ice. Harmon turned to me, his eyes meeting mine for the first time. Ma'am, he said, his voice breaking. I apologize for my disgraceful behavior. There is no excuse for how I spoke to you or about you. Daniels stepped forward, his hands clenched. We failed you, ma'am. We judged you without knowing. We are sorry. Their words hung in the air, raw and heavy. I studied them, seeing not just their shame, but the men they might become. The commissary watched, its silence a judgment. I could let their apology hang, let their guilt fester. But I remembered Callahan's last lesson. Leadership was not about vengeance, but about teaching. You could not have known, I said, my voice steady. That was the point of my unit. We worked in shadows so others could stand in the light. Harmon's shoulders sagged, relief and regret mixing in his eyes. Thank you, ma'am, he whispered. The general dismissed them with a nod, his gaze returning to me. Your jacket, he said, his voice softer now. It is not standard Spectre issue. I remember your team in multicam. I ran my fingers over the faded olive fabric, the texture rough with memory. It was Major Callahan's, I said, my throat tight. He did not make it back from Tehran. I have worn it ever since. The general's eyes darkened, a shadow passing over his face. He opened his mouth to speak, but a young soldier approached, her voice trembling. Captain Carter? Is it true? Were you really Spectre unit? The young soldier's question hung in the air, fragile as a held breath. Her eyes, wide with awe, searched mine, waiting for confirmation of a truth I had spent decades guarding. General Henry Brooks leaned back, his coffee cooling, his gaze a silent prompt to answer. I clutched Major Callahan's jacket, the worn fabric a tether to the past, and felt the weight of every ghost I carried. The commissary's hum faded, and for a moment I was back in that desert, the sandstorm swallowing my team's screams. I exhaled, my voice low but steady. Yes, I said. I was Spectre Unit. The soldier gasped, her hand covering her mouth, and the crowd murmured, their curiosity a living thing. General Brooks nodded, a faint approval in his eyes. The young soldier stammered, "Thank you, ma'am," and retreated, her boots scuffing the linoleum. I turned back to the general, my heart pounding. The confession, so simple, felt like shedding armor I had worn for 22 years. But with it came a flood of memories, Callahan's last order, the blood on my hands, the silence that followed. The cafe corner was dim, the flickering light casting shadows on the general's face. His 4 stars gleamed, a reminder of the chasm between us, yet his voice was soft, almost confessional. Tehran was a crucible, he said, his fingers tracing the rim of his cup. Your team turned the impossible into reality. I have carried that debt ever since. I swallowed, the weight of his words pressing against my chest. We did our duty, sir, I said, my voice rough. But the cost? I stopped. The names of my fallen teammates, Callahan, Way, Rodriguez, Decker, choking me. Only 3 of us had survived, and I was the last. The general's eyes darkened, as if he saw the ghosts at our table. Tell me about Callahan, he said, his tone gentle but firm. I ran my fingers over the jacket's frayed cuff, the fabric stained with memories. Major Daniel Callahan, I began, my voice barely above a whisper. Our commander, fearless but not reckless. He saw the mission through, no matter the odds. I paused, the desert night vivid in my mind. In Tehran, he held the perimeter alone, gave us time to get the diplomats out. His last order was to leave him behind. My throat tightened, and I looked down, the coffee's steam blurring my vision. His jacket was all I could bring back. General Brooks nodded, his jaw tight. Callahan was a legend, even to those who never knew his name. His sacrifice saved us all. He leaned forward, his voice dropping. And you, Captain Carter, you carried his legacy alone. The words were a knife, cutting through the walls I had built. I wanted to protest, to say I had no choice, but the truth was heavier. I had chosen silence, chosen to bury the pain rather than face a world that could not understand. It was easier, I admitted, my voice breaking, to stay in the shadows. The general's gaze held mine, steady and unyielding. Not anymore, he said. Your service will be recognized. I will see to it. My chest tightened, gratitude and fear warring within me. Recognition was a double-edged sword. It would honor my team, but also unearth wounds I had long buried. Before I could respond, a shadow fell across the table. Lieutenants Harmon and Daniels stood there again, their postures rigid, their faces flushed with shame. Harmon cleared his throat, his voice tight. Ma'am, we need to say more. General Brooks raised an eyebrow, his silence a command. I nodded, my hands clenched around my cup. Harmon stepped forward, his eyes meeting mine. What we did, mocking you, questioning your service, it was shameful, he said, his voice raw. We disrespected a hero. We failed the values we swore to uphold. Daniels nodded, his hands trembling. We judged you by a jacket, ma'am. We did not know what it meant, but that is no excuse. We are sorry, and we will do better. Their words were earnest, stripped of the bravado that had fueled their taunts. I saw their youth, their ambition, their fear of failing in a world that demanded perfection. I studied them, my scar throbbing, the memory of Callahan's sacrifice sharp in my mind. They were not my enemies, just boys who had stumbled into a truth larger than themselves. "You made a mistake," I said, my voice steady but soft. "But you are here, owning it. That is more than most." I paused, choosing my words carefully. "My unit lived in shadows so you could stand in the light. Learn from this and honor those who came before you." Harmon's shoulders sagged, relief and resolve mixing in his eyes. "Yes, ma'am," he said. Daniels echoed him, his voice quieter. "Thank you, ma'am." The general dismissed them with a curt nod, his gaze returning to me. "They will carry this lesson," he said, his tone firm. "As will others." He checked his watch, his posture shifting to the commander once more. "I have a meeting, but this is not over, Captain. My office is expediting your records. The VA will process your claims and your injuries will be treated. No more circles." I opened my mouth to protest, to say it was too much, but he raised a hand. "This is not charity. It is justice. Your team saved lives, including mine. Some debts cannot stay classified." I nodded, my throat tight, emotions surging like a tide. "Thank you, sir," I whispered. He stood, his coffee untouched, and gestured to the cafe's exit. "Come to my office this afternoon. We have more to discuss, your benefits, your recognition, and perhaps a role for you here." A role? The idea was foreign, daunting, after years of silence. I stood, my grocery bags heavy, my limp more pronounced as I followed him. The crowd watched, their earlier mockery replaced by respect, curiosity, even awe. The cashier, James, nodded as I passed, his veteran's cap tilted in salute. Outside the cafe, the commissary buzzed with its morning rhythm, carts rattling, voices overlapping, flags snapping in the breeze beyond the windows. But for me, everything had shifted. The general's salute, his promise, had cracked the shell I had built around my pain. I felt raw, exposed, but also lighter, as if the ghosts I carried were finally seen. I moved toward the exit, my bags brushing my leg, when a memory struck, sharp and unbidden. The debriefing after Tyron, 2003. A sterile room, the air thick with disinfectant. I sat alone, my leg bandaged, my shoulder screaming, Callahan's jacket folded in my lap. The officer across the table, his face blurred by time, had been clear in his orders. "Spectre unit does not exist, Captain Carter. Your mission, your team, your injuries, classified. Speak of this to no one." I had nodded, the weight of silence settling like dust. I had carried it ever since, through years of pain, bureaucracy, and isolation. But now General Brooks had changed the rules. I reached the automatic doors, the sunlight beyond a harsh glare. My reflection flickered in the glass. A woman in a faded jacket, her gray hair tight, her eyes no longer hollow but burning. I adjusted the jacket, the patch a faint outline, and felt Callahan's presence, his voice in my ear. "You did it, Carter. You got them out." I had, but at what cost? 3 of us had survived, but I was the last, the sole keeper of our story. Until today. As I stepped toward the doors, a young officer approached, her lieutenant bars gleaming, her eyes bright with purpose. "Captain Carter?" she said, her voice trembling with respect. "I am Lieutenant Sarah Miller, 103rd Military Intelligence. I heard about Tyron. Is it true you led the extraction?" Her question was a spark, threatening to ignite the past I had only just begun to share. I froze, my heart racing, the doors sliding open to reveal the world beyond. Could I tell her? Could I let the shadows speak? Lieutenant Sarah Miller's question hung like a live wire, sparking against the silence I had guarded for decades. Her eyes, bright with admiration, searched mine, unaware of the weight her words carried. The commissary doors stood open, sunlight spilling in, and I felt exposed, as if the shadows I had lived in were dissolving under her gaze. Could I speak of Tyron? Could I let the ghosts of my team breathe? My hand tightened on my grocery bags, Major Callahan's jacket heavy on my shoulders, and I knew the answer would change everything. I exhaled, my voice low but steady. "Yes, Lieutenant," I said. "I was part of the Tyron extraction." Her face lit up, a mix of awe and hunger for knowledge, and she stepped closer, her boots soft on the linoleum. "Ma'am, your techniques, they are in our updated field manual. I am with the 103rd Military Intelligence. Would you consider speaking to my platoon?" The request was a jolt, pulling me from the past into a future I had never imagined. Teaching, sharing, stepping out of the shadows. My throat tightened and I nodded, surprising myself. "Within classification limits," I said, my voice rough. "I will consider it." Her smile was radiant, and she handed me her contact card, her fingers trembling with excitement. "Thank you, ma'am. This will mean everything to them." She saluted, crisp and precise, and I returned it, my arm steady despite the ache in my shoulder. As she walked away, her stride purposeful, I stood frozen, the card burning in my hand. The commissary buzzed around me, carts rattling, voices overlapping, the air sharp with coffee and bleach. But I was elsewhere, grappling with the idea of speaking aloud what I had buried for 22 years. Callahan's voice echoed in my mind. "Get them out, Carter. That's the mission." I had obeyed, but now the mission was shifting, and I was not sure I was ready. I stepped through the doors, the sunlight harsh against my eyes. Fort Braxton stretched before me, flags snapping in the breeze, recruits jogging in formation, their cadence calls faint in the distance. My limp was more pronounced now, the shrapnel in my leg protesting the morning's strain. I adjusted my bags and headed toward my car, the weight of Lieutenant Miller's request settling like dust. Teaching meant opening wounds, but it also meant honoring my team, Callahan, Way, Rodriguez, Decker, whose sacrifices had been redacted from history. I reached my car, the faded olive of my jacket catching the light, and paused, my reflection faint in the window. The woman staring back stood straighter, her eyes no longer hollow but uncertain, searching for a path forward. The drive to the VA office was short, the base's orderly grid unfolding under a clear sky. I parked and entered the low brick building, its lobby sterile and cold, the air thick with disinfectant. The receptionist, a young man with a bored expression, barely looked up as I approached. "Name and purpose?" he asked, typing. "Emily Carter," I said, my voice steady. "Medical appeal follow-up." He glanced at my jacket, his eyes lingering on the faded patch, and typed faster. "Take a seat. Someone will call you." I sat on a hard plastic chair, my grocery bags at my feet, and waited. The lobby was quiet, save for the hum of a vending machine and the murmur of a TV in the corner. My mind drifted, unbidden, to Tyron. The sandstorm had been relentless, blinding us as we fought to secure the extraction corridor. Rodriguez, our comms specialist, had stayed at his post, his voice steady through the static, guiding us until a sniper's bullet silenced him. I had dragged his body to the helicopter, my legs screaming, his blood soaking my hands. The memory clawed at me, and I clenched my fists, the scar on my wrist throbbing. I had survived, but at what cost? "Ms. Carter?" A woman's voice pulled me back. She was middle-aged, her badge reading Dr. Ellis, her eyes kind but tired. I stood, my limp evident, and followed her to a small office cluttered with files. She gestured to a chair, and I sat, my jacket creaking. "Your appeal," she began, scanning her computer. There's been progress. My heart skipped. Progress? I asked, my voice cautious. She nodded, her fingers pausing on the keyboard. New documentation appeared in the system this morning. Injuries sustained in a 2003 operation, classified but now partially declassified. Your leg, your shoulder, they're approved for treatment. I stared, the words sinking in slowly, like water into parched earth. General Brooks had moved mountains, just as he promised. My chest tightened, gratitude and disbelief warring within me. What does this mean? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Doctor. Ellis smiled, a rare warmth in her eyes. Physical therapy, surgery if needed, full benefits. We can start next week. I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. After years of denials, of bureaucratic circles, the system was bending. But the relief was bittersweet, shadowed by the teammates who would never see this day. I left the VA office, the sunlight softer now, the air carrying a hint of autumn. My car felt like a sanctuary, the quiet enveloping me as I sat, my hands on the wheel. I pulled out Lieutenant Miller's card, its edges crisp, and traced her name. Teaching her platoon meant telling their story, Callahan's sacrifice, Rodriguez's courage, Way's quiet strength, Decker's stubborn will. It meant letting the world see them, even if only in fragments. But it also meant facing my own guilt, the weight of being the last. I tucked the card into my jacket, next to the faded photograph of my team, their faces shadowed but vivid in my memory. Back at my small apartment on base, I set my groceries on the counter, the routine grounding me. The kitchen was sparse, the walls bare except for a single frame, a commendation letter, its details redacted, the only official trace of my service. I hung Callahan's jacket on a hook, its frayed cuffs catching the light. My phone buzzed and I glanced at it. A message from Lieutenant Miller. Ma'am, my platoon is available next week. Please let me know if you can speak. Thank you. I stared at the words, my heart racing. The decision loomed, a fork in the road I had never expected to face. I sank onto the couch, my leg aching, and closed my eyes. Tyrion came again, unbidden. The helicopter's roar, the sand in my lungs, Callahan's voice over the radio. Hold the corridor, Carter! Get them out! I had, but he had stayed, his silhouette vanishing as I boarded the chopper, my leg bleeding, my shoulder torn. I had screamed his name, but the pilot had pulled us skyward, the desert swallowing him. The guilt had followed me, a shadow darker than any classification. I opened my eyes, the apartment silent, the weight of Miller's request pressing against me. I stood, my movements slow, and walked to the closet. Inside, a locked box held the original Spectre unit patch, its emblem sharp and clear, preserved from the years that had worn my jacket's stitches to nothing. I opened the box, the patch glinting in the dim light, and ran my fingers over it. Callahan had designed it, his pride in our unit etched in every line. We are ghosts, he had said, but ghosts who save lives. I had been a ghost too long, hiding from the light. Miller's platoon deserved to know what we had done, what we had lost. I picked up my phone and typed a reply, my hands steady despite the storm inside. Lieutenant Miller, I will speak to your platoon next week. Let me know the details. I hit send, the decision a weight lifting and settling all at once. The ghosts of my team were with me, their voices softer now, urging me forward. I hung the patch back in its box, but the jacket stayed on its hook, a reminder of the path I was choosing. As I turned to unpack my groceries, my phone buzzed again. It was General Brooks's office, a formal email. Captain Carter, please attend a meeting tomorrow regarding further declassification and a potential training role. Your expertise is needed. My heart raced, the world shifting beneath me. Teaching, recognition, a roll. After decades of silence, the shadows were cracking, and I was stepping through. But as I set the phone down, a new question burned. What would it cost to let the world see me? The commissary doors slid open, and I stepped into Fort Braxton's morning pulse, the air sharp with the scent of asphalt and coffee. 3 months had passed since General Brooks's salute, and I was no longer a ghost. My jacket, Major Callahan's jacket, hung on my shoulders, its olive fabric carefully cleaned, the Spectre unit patch restored above my heart. The emblem gleamed, subdued but clear, no longer a faded secret. Below it, a small pin shone, a presidential unit citation, awarded after 22 years of silence. My stride was stronger, my limp softened by physical therapy, but the weight of what I carried remained, urging me toward a purpose I was only beginning to understand. The commissary buzzed with its familiar rhythm, boots scuffing linoleum, carts rattling, flags snapping outside in the breeze. I selected a red basket, my grocery list tucked in my pocket, and moved through the aisles. Shoppers glanced at me, their eyes lingering on the patch, the pin, their nods carrying respect rather than curiosity or scorn. Word had spread through the base, not the full story. Most of Tyron remained classified, but enough to mark me as someone who had earned her place. I paused at the canned goods, comparing prices out of habit, though my VA benefits, approved 2 days after my meeting with General Brooks, had eased the strain. My fingers, scarred at the wrist, traced a soup can's label, and I felt Callahan's presence, his voice steady in my memory. "You did it, Carter." "You got them out." A familiar figure appeared at the aisle's end. James, the cashier, his veteran's cap tilted as he restocked shelves. He saw me and smiled, his weathered face creasing. "Morning, Captain Carter," he said, his nod landing on my restored patch. "That emblem looks right now. About time it got the respect it deserves." I returned his smile, a rare ease in my chest. "Morning, Master Sergeant," I said, using his former rank, learned from our now regular exchanges. "Things have changed, thanks to some stubborn folks," he chuckled, his hands steady as he stacked cans. "Some of us knew that patch meant something, never asked, but we knew." His discretion born of his own service was a quiet gift. I nodded, grateful, and placed 2 cans in my basket. I moved to the pasta section, the fluorescent lights humming overhead. My shoulder ached, a dull reminder of the shrapnel that therapy could not fully erase, but I reached for a box of spaghetti with less pain than before. As I did, a voice called out, tentative but clear. "Captain Carter?" I turned, my basket steady, and saw Lieutenant Harmon, one of the lieutenants who had mocked me 3 months ago. He stood alone, his uniform crisp, a grocery list clutched in his hand. His face cycled through recognition, embarrassment, and resolve, his youth stark in the morning light. He approached, stopping a respectful distance away, his posture rigid. "Lieutenant Harmon," I said, my voice calm but guarded. He cleared his throat, his eyes meeting mine. "Ma'am, I wanted to tell you. Your case is part of our officer training now. General Brooks introduced it himself." My eyebrows rose, surprise flickering. "Is that so?" I asked, setting the pasta in my basket. He nodded, his hands clasped behind his back. "Yes, ma'am." "Not the classified details, but your story. How we misjudged you, how we failed to respect what we did not understand. It is a lesson on assumptions, on honoring service, especially the kind that stays in the shadows." His voice was earnest, stripped of the bravado that had once fueled his taunts. I studied him, seeing the officer he was becoming, shaped by his mistake. "Those are good lessons," I said, my tone softening. "For any officer." Harmon hesitated, then added, "I have taken them to heart, ma'am, especially after my failure that day." His cheeks flushed, but he held my gaze. I remembered Callahan's last lesson. Leadership was not about perfection, but about growth. "We all learn from experience, Lieutenant," I said, my voice gentle. The best lessons come from our mistakes. He straightened, relief in his eyes.
Thank you, ma'am. And thank you for your service.
He saluted and I returned it, my arm steady, the motion a bridge between us. As Harmon walked away, I continued shopping, a thoughtful weight settling in my chest. The exchange was one of many over the past months, as the base community began to see me not as a faded figure, but as a link to a hidden history. I reached the checkout where James scanned my items with practiced ease. "Heard you are speaking to Lieutenant Miller's platoon next week," he said, bagging my groceries. "Word travels fast," I replied, a faint smile tugging at my lips. He grinned, handing me my receipt. "Good. Those kids need to hear from someone who's been through the fire." I paid in cash, the transaction smoother now that financial strain was less pressing. As I gathered my bags, a young female officer approached, her lieutenant bars gleaming, her eyes bright with nervous energy. "Captain Carter?" she said, her voice steady despite her youth. "I am Lieutenant Sarah Miller. We spoke about my platoon." I nodded, recognizing her from our brief encounter, her card still tucked in my jacket. "Lieutenant Miller," I said. "I am preparing for next week." Her face lit up and she stepped closer. "Ma'am, your tyrant extraction, it is already changing how we train. Your insight will be invaluable." Her admiration was a mirror, reflecting a version of myself I was only beginning to accept. "Thank you," I said, my voice quieter. "I will do my best to share what I can." She saluted, and I returned it, my heart racing with the weight of what I had agreed to. Teaching meant opening wounds, but it also meant preserving my team's legacy. Callahan's courage, Rodriguez's sacrifice, Way's resolve, Decker's grit. As Miller departed, I headed for the exit, the automatic doors gleaming ahead. The morning sun was higher now, casting sharp relief across the base, recruits jogging in formation, their cadence calls a steady pulse. I paused outside, adjusting my bags when my phone buzzed. An email from General Brooks's office marked urgent. I opened it, my breath catching. "Captain Carter, we have located Specialist Rodriguez's family. Partial declassification allows us to award his Silver Star posthumously. His daughter, now 26, will receive it next month. Your presence is requested at the ceremony." My chest tightened, Rodriguez's face vivid in my mind. His grin, his steady voice through the static, his body limp as I dragged him to the helicopter. His daughter had grown up believing he died in a training accident, a lie to protect the mission. Now she would know he was a hero, even if the full truth remained redacted. I stood frozen, the sun warm on my face, emotions surging, pride, grief, relief. Rodriguez's sacrifice, like Callahan's, had been buried too long. My eyes stung, and I blinked, the patch on my jacket catching the light. I had carried their memories alone, the last of Spectre Unit, but now their story was breaking through, piece by piece. The ceremony would be bittersweet, a step toward justice, but it would also reopen wounds I had never fully closed. I tucked my phone away, my hands trembling, and started toward my car, the weight of the news a new anchor in my chest. As I walked, a young soldier saluted, his eyes on my patch, his respect unforced. I returned it, my stride steadier, the pin on my jacket gleaming. I was no longer invisible, no longer caught between worlds. But the ghosts remained, their voices softer now, urging me to speak, to teach, to honor them. I reached my car, the reflection in the window showing a woman transformed, not fully in the light, but no longer in shadow. And as I opened the trunk, a question burned. Could I face Rodriguez's daughter and tell her the truth we had hidden for so long? The lecture hall smelled of polished wood and fresh paint, its walls lined with maps and insignias that spoke of battles long past. I stood at the podium, my hands steady on its edge, Major Callahan's jacket heavy on my shoulders. The restored Spectre Unit patch gleamed, The Presidential Unit citation pin catching the light. Lieutenant Sarah Miller's platoon sat before me, 30 young faces, their eyes bright with anticipation. My heart pounded, the weight of their gaze pulling me back to Tyron, sand in my lungs, Callahan's last order, the silence that followed. After 22 years of shadows, I was about to speak their names aloud. I cleared my throat, my voice low but firm. My name is Emily Carter, former captain, Spectre Unit. In 2003, my team executed a classified extraction in Tehran, Iran. What I can share is limited, but it is enough to honor those who did not come home. The room was silent, pens poised, eyes locked on me. I paused, my scar throbbing, and saw Callahan's face, his grin sharp in the desert dark. Major Daniel Callahan led us, I continued. He held the perimeter alone, gave his life so 32 others could live. Specialist Rodriguez, Lieutenant Way, Sergeant Decker, they fought beside him, each a hero in ways no record will ever show. My voice wavered, but I pressed on, detailing the mission's chaos, the sandstorm, the impossible choices. I shared what declassification allowed, tactics, teamwork, sacrifice, leaving the classified heart of Tehran in shadow. Lieutenant Miller nodded from the front row, her notebook open, her admiration a quiet anchor. A young soldier raised his hand, his voice hesitant. "Ma'am, how did you keep going, knowing so few would know?" I exhaled, the question cutting deep. "You carry the mission," I said.
Not for glory, but for those beside you. Their names, their faces, they keep you moving."
The room absorbed my words, a ripple of understanding passing through. I ended with Callahan's last lesson. Leadership is not about being seen. It is about doing what must be done, even in the dark. The platoon applauded, their respect a warmth I had not felt in decades. Miller approached, her salute crisp. "Ma'am, that was extraordinary."
"Thank you."
I returned her salute, my chest tight with pride and grief. I left the hall, the morning sun high over Fort Braxton, flags snapping in the breeze. My limp was softer now, physical therapy easing the shrapnel's bite. But the ghosts of my team walked with me. Callahan, Rodriguez, Way, Decker, their voices softer, urging me forward. I headed toward headquarters, my jacket catching the light, the restored patch a quiet declaration. General Henry Brooks had summoned me, his email brief but urgent. "Captain Carter, we have news about Specialist Rodriguez's ceremony. Meet me at 1100. The thought of facing Rodriguez's daughter, of telling her even a fragment of her father's truth, stirred a storm in my chest. The general's office was stark, its walls adorned with commendations and a single-framed map of the Middle East. Brooks stood as I entered, his 4 stars gleaming, his silver hair sharp in the light. "Captain Carter," he said, his voice warm but commanding. "Take a seat." I sat, my hands clasped, Callahan's jacket creasing slightly. He leaned forward, his eyes steady. "The Silver Star ceremony for Specialist Rodriguez is set for next month. His daughter, Elena, will accept it. She is 26, a teacher, unaware her father died a hero until now." My throat tightened, Rodriguez's face vivid, his laugh, his steady hands on the radio, his body limp as I dragged him to safety. "She deserves to know," I said softly. "Even if it is only part of the truth." Brooks nodded, his jaw tight. "She will, and we want you there, Captain, as the last of Spectre Unit Chiol. Your presence will honor him." I swallowed, the weight of the request settling. "Of course, sir," I said. "It would mean everything to stand for him." He studied me, his gaze softening. "There is more," he said, sliding a folder across the desk. "We are launching a training program for complex extractions based on your Tehran operation. Your input is critical. Tactics, decision-making, the kind of experience no manual can teach." I froze, the offer daunting. Teaching a platoon was one thing, shaping doctrine was another. "I am no instructor, sir," I said, my voice cautious. "My expertise is buried." He leaned back, his eyes unyielding. "Your expertise is exactly what we need, Captain. Tyron redefined limited resource extractions. You lived it? Help us pass it on." I ran my fingers over my jacket, the patch a reminder of Callahan's legacy. He had trained me to lead, to survive, to honor the mission. This was a new mission, one I could not refuse. "I will do it, sir," I said, my voice steady. "For my team." Brooks smiled, a rare warmth in his face. "Good. My staff will coordinate with you, and one last thing. Rodriguez's family asked to meet you before the ceremony. They want to understand who their father was." The words hit like a bullet, raw and sharp. Meeting Elena meant facing Rodriguez's absence, my survival where he had fallen. I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. Brooks stood, offering his hand. "Your service is no longer invisible, Captain. Neither are you." I shook his hand, my scar pulsing, and left the office, the folder tucked under my arm. Outside, the base hummed, recruits jogging, vehicles rumbling, life moving forward. I paused, the sun warm on my face, and felt the ghosts of my team, their presence lighter now, as if my words had freed them. I drove home, the folder on the passenger seat, its weight a promise and a burden. My apartment was quiet, the kitchen sparse, Callahan's jacket hung on its hook. I opened the folder, scanning the training program's outline. Tactics I had lived, choices I had made, losses I had carried. I set it aside and pulled out the locked box from my closet, the original Spectre unit patch inside, its emblem sharp and clear. I held it, my fingers tracing its lines, and saw my team's faces, their laughter, their courage. They were gone, but their legacy was not. I was their voice, their witness, and I would carry them into the light. That evening I sat at my small table, a blank page before me, drafting notes for Rodriguez's ceremony. I wrote of his humor, his resolve, his final transmission that guided us through the storm. The words flowed, painful but necessary, a bridge to his daughter. My phone buzzed, a message from Lieutenant Miller. "Ma'am, the platoon is still talking about your lecture." "You changed how they see service, thank you." I smiled, a genuine warmth reaching my eyes, and typed a reply. "Thank you, Lieutenant. They give me hope." I stood, my limp barely noticeable, and walked to the window. Fort Braxton stretched below, its lights steady in the dusk, a world I had once haunted but now belonged to. I was no longer the woman in the faded jacket, mocked and unseen. I was Captain Emily Carter, Spectre Unit, the last of my team, stepping into a middle ground where our sacrifices could be honored, our lessons shared. The ghosts remained, Callahan, Rodriguez, Way, Decker, but they were not burdens now. They were my strength, my purpose, guiding me as I prepared to meet Elena, to teach, to build a legacy that would outlive the shadows. As I turned from the window, my reflection caught in the glass. A woman transformed, her patch gleaming, her eyes alive with resolve. The ceremony loomed, a chance to give Rodriguez the honor he deserved, to let his daughter see the hero I had known. And beyond it, a training program, a chance to shape the future, to ensure no sacrifice stayed buried. I closed my eyes, Callahan's voice soft in my memory. "You did it, Carter." I had, and I would keep going, for them, for me, for the light we had earned.